Awakening. This is the trumpet call of the Judgment. And this card, this path, has received many different names. Of course, it's received the name the Judgment, or the Last Judgment. Here we see in an early deck of Visconti Sforza, the Pierpont Morgan, the angels of God trumpeting as the people come out of this flesh-colored grave. And famously, of course, this motif, again, of the angel of awakening, is almost certainly Gabriel calling out the people from the grave at the I guess the second coming, or the Last Judgment. Now, this card usually has that connotation, but if you're familiar with Crowley's deck, you see that he's shifted the meaning of it. And this is due to the fact that in Crowley's understanding, the formula of death and rebirth, the Christian idea of being reborn and judged in this way, was moot. As of 1904, within Crowley's paradigm, the Age of Horus was declared, in which that formula, death and rebirth, which is understood as an Osirian formula, has been replaced with a new formula. And so he chose to use this card to represent the Aeon. And the Aeon of Horus is the Aeon of the crowned and conquering child. And it's a new paradigm. You can see in it the body of infinite space, Nuit, the god Rahur, the crowned and conquering king, and then outside of it, this is Horpakrat, or Harpocrates, the god of mystical silence. And you can see this letter Shin. And in this Shin are three figures that are crossing a membrane of fire. And of course this winged disc here, which represents Hadit. And Hadit is the infinitely small point. Basically, in the concept of this aeon, is the infinitely broad horizon of depth and the infinitely condensed singularity, the point and the horizon, which is similar to the symbol, of course, for the sun. The symbol for the sun, famously, is the point within the circle. Reconciliation of the point and the circle is the subject of the mystical quest to dissolve the particular into the universal and have the universal nevertheless reconstitute the particular as part of a play, as two modes of a single reality. And so you can see that in this card we have this shape, and it's actually an Ankh shaped in the back, which is a symbol of life. And it's fair to say probably that these could be the four elements. And so there's this image of waking up, crossing out of the elements into something larger. In a way, that's what this card is about, because remember we were talking about last week the world, and what is the world? It's like a sleeping dragon, a sleeping giant. All that there is present, but we are a minute speck going about our routines, going about our daily lives within this enormous ocean of transactions of which we're almost entirely unaware. And even the filtering programs we use to perceive the small speck of reality, those are tuned to pragmatic matters in such a way that we are largely asleep. But of course, the purpose of a spiritual quest is to awaken ourselves to the patterns which constitute us, both internally and externally. There's something to be said for a revelatory moment in which the structures that filter and produce reality are exposed. And there have been moments like this all through history. Revolutions are largely based upon discoveries of the mechanisms of hidden structures of power. And I'm drawn to think about the events of May 1968 in Paris. In May 1968 in Paris, there was a kind of a seizure of the city, as far as I know. Paris was shut down by groups organizing out of the universities, and there were several intellectuals who were major players in this. And one of them was Michel Foucault, and another was Gilles Deleuze, and no doubt others were involved in different ways. It was a massive break. And of course, French history is filled with revolution and these kinds of breaks with itself, in a way. It's known for its revolutionary history. But I think May 68 is interesting because the currents that came out of it, in particular, I'm thinking Foucault, who wrote about prisons and who wrote about hospitals and schools, and exposed that there are structures that essentially reproduce the same modalities, like the famous panopticon of Jeremy Bentham, which is a type of prison in which a guard sits in the center and can see all the prisoners in a ring. These logics, which had ended up embedding themselves in social institutions, were exposed during this moment, during this breach. And what we can call this type of moment is an apocalypse. Apocalypse comes from Greek root, which is basically to pull apart the veil, to remove the veil. And when normally we think about apocalypse, we think of the zombie apocalypse. We think about the book of Revelation, which is classed as an apocalypse, the apocalypse of John of Patmos, to be precise. The book of Revelations was added in to the Christian Bible at the very, very end, and it has this extraordinary series of visions, of Gnostic visions, that some minds predict, a future in which beasts come out of the sea, and whores of Babylon ride about, and there are vials of the wrath of God broken, and then finally this city descends called the New Jerusalem, which is an analog basically to the Garden of Eden, and it's an urbanized envisionment of a return to primordial unity. So it creates a program in a way through the whole collection of texts. I don't want to go too deep into that, but what I want to suggest is that the apocalypse is the exposure through symbol and metaphor of these deep structures, these deep filters. And in the world, we simply are present. We're present to our functioning, to the sleeping giant. But what happens when you put attention to this, of course, when you make this aware, and when you I am meditating on the world, it raises questions, right? It raises an awareness, and that awareness is like a fire. And it's like a fire that starts to blaze upwards from Malkuth, and it starts to burn up. Well, Malkuth arguably is a fuel. It starts to blaze up from here in this the 31st path, and it starts to carry us upwards. And this is the first moment that flame ignites. This is the Hebrew letter Shin. It means tooth. So it's perhaps a molar with these crowns, but this letter is extraordinary. It is sometimes used as the fifth element. So as you recall, there are 4 elements, and the Tetragrammaton codes them. So the Tetragrammaton, which is the 4-letter name of God, like so, was in fact added to, I believe, Marsilio Ficino, or actually no, it would be his student, Pico della Mirandola, the founder of Christian mysticism, or Christian Kabbalah, sorry, not founder of Christian mysticism, founder of Christian Kabbalah in the Italian Renaissance. At any rate, my sense is that this comes from him, and what he did is add the Shin to the holy name of God, spelling the word Yeshua, or Jesus. And so this is Pentagrammaton. So that is one of the things that Shin implicates. Shin is, of course, has 3 yods that are connected, and so it is Trinitarian in its essence, and its gematria value is 300. So Shin very strongly implicates this kind of concept of a triple force, a triunity, if you will, and this flame then that is ignited by our contemplations begins to carry us through a kind of, I want to call it a trialectic. A dialectic is, of course, a twofold rhythm of thesis, antithesis, and then the synthesis is actually the thesis of the next series. So it's thesis, antithesis, synthesis, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, antithesis, synthesis, antithesis, synthesis. This is a Hegelian dialectic. There's problems with the Hegelian dialectic. I'm not going to go into them, but the thing to consider is that the third point is rendered neutral. There is no third point. There is no third presence, if you will. There's 2 presences and a kind of a false third. But in the work we do, there is a positive third presence. And if you think of, you have 2 strands and you try to twist them together, they unravel very easily. But if you have 3, you can form a braid. And a braid, of course, holds fast. The third point creates the braid. And what I want to suggest then is that in the awakening of the judgment, there is a kind of a awakening of this triple mode of thought. And you could look at it using the logic of yes, no, and moo. So if anyone here has read Robert Pirsig's Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, you know that he made a big deal of inserting a third proposition called moo. And moo is basically, I don't have enough information. I decline to answer yes or no. And as I'm sure you know, yes or no are a dilemma. So you often get a yes or no answer is demanded of you. This goes back to the exclusion of the middle, goes back all the way to Aristotelian logic, which functions on the exclusion of the middle, and the idea that a contradiction that emerges within a set of logics, a contradiction is destructive of the logic. So it turns out that you have to exclude the middle term. You have to not have the ability to say moo in order to create a logical engine that functions on mechanically, basically, on the idea of destructive contradiction. If you decide to accept a statement of ambiguity or paradox as valid, then you're entering a different kind of logic, which incorporates something called a dialetheia. And a dialetheia is a true contradiction, an embrasure, if you will, of paradox. And I will say that in order to get beyond this kind of mechanical brain that we've gotten so entrained with, in order to awaken to gnosis, we have to engage this type of direct perception, this embrasure of paradox, which is the dialethic. And dialethic logics, as far as I know, do not produce machines to the same degree of pressure that those with the excluded middle or dialectic engines do. But a trialectic has also embraces awareness, and it incorporates, in my understanding, the participant or the observer in the observation, to the point where the two sort of segue into one another and ultimately become indistinguishable, which to my mind is suggested by the findings of the quantum physicists and the interpretations that are arising that suggest that observation is a factor, or consciousness is a factor in the determination of the outcome of events. There is not a neutral passive observer, as Descartes would have you believe. So we are always and forever an emanation into the state of affairs, and this should be an awakening. And of course we know this, we know this, we've heard this before, but to feel it, to feel this awakening occur, this is what this process, if you followed along with me for 12 weeks now, this process should begin to really feel like it's leading towards an awakening sense, a vision, if you will, eyes that can see how the folds and boundaries and codes lay out the terrain of our reality. This is the revelation. This is the apocalypse. And if you consider the Athbash that we were talking about, if you remember Aleph, Ta, Ath, Bet, Shin, Bash, and on it goes. You've taken the alphabet, you've folded it over. And what I do is I use the pairs of cards that total 21, because in the Rider-Waite-Smith model, those are always the Athbash pairs. So Aleph and Ta are the first and last. They come together. That actually forms a word, which is Eth, which means essence. Bet, Shin comes together, forms a pair. The Fool and the Universe are the outer kind of rim. And then right on the inside of them comes Judgment and the Magician. So the Magician is in a deep polar relationship with the Judgment. So as we rise, in a way, there's a self in the future that is the Magician. You can wave right now to the self, I guess 20 weeks from now, or 21 weeks from now, or so, who's doing the path of the Magician, because they're there now, moving backwards. So we've got two strands. We've got fire moving up, and we've got nectar moving down. And in the center, of course, we'll cross. But just bear it in mind that right now we're in a relationship with ourselves in the future. And what we build now ends up being what we bequeath to ourselves in the future. And part of this work is about constantly being aware of the bequeathment of quality to yourself in the future. That's a revelation in and of itself. So Shin is valued at 300, and it is one of the three mother letters. There are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. 7 of them are called double letters, and they represent the planets. 3 of them are called mother letters, and they represent fire, water, and air. And 12 of them are called single letters, or simple letters, and they represent the zodiac. the Golden Dawn decided to double up on the path of Tao and of Shin. And Shin, by the Golden Dawn, was assigned to both fire and spirit, and Tao was assigned to both Saturn and Earth, because they wanted spirit and Earth to be incorporated in the system. I've chosen to basically ignore that, because Earth and spirit are implied by fire, water, and air, and then you can derive the rest from them. So I don't think that they're necessary, because they emerge out of the system itself. However, so Shin is fire. This is the fire that boils the cauldron. This is the fire that ignites the incense. This is the fire that begins to burn away the obstacles that are in our way and begins to rise. So we've been, if you will, awoken by this trumpet call, and we feel this fire rising up. Shin is, in its expanded form, is spelled Shin Yud Nun. Now I could make this a final form. So there are 22 Hebrew letters, but there are actually 5 final forms, which is when a letter appears at the end. So 5 of the letters have a kind of a double function. And I'll talk about that more in a bit. But so this, you can choose to make it the final form, which has a different number value, or you can keep it in this regular form. So in this case, Shin is Shin Yod Nun. And Nun is worth 50. Yod is worth 10, Shin is worth 300. So this is 360. So right there and right then we have the emblem of the circle. So here it goes. We have now opened the circle. And you can see that the letter Shin, when you pronounce it, Shin, flashes in its expanded form. It's called flashing. It flashes that value of 360, immediately creating the zodiac itself. So, where are we going with this? By opening the circle, we have suddenly brought into being the magical portal. So, if Tao, if the world is the gate, then the Shin is stepping through the gate. It is the transition into the magical paradigm completely. We are now on the path, and the circle is now fully open. So there are some very interesting things to note about the nature of the circle and the nature of the Shin. Okay. So I have talked quite a bit about a word called the Shem Mephorash. That means name of extension. And the Shem Mephorash is a 72-fold word that is derived from the book of Exodus, the passage which involves crossing the Red Sea. And it's devised, it's drawn by 3 passages, each with 72 letters, and a form of reading that goes up and down and up and down and up and down, called Busterphaedon, or as the ox plows. So I have a deck of cards. This is by Kabbalah Insights. This is Jewish Kabbalah. I love this deck of cards. It's amazing. It's the woman who does this. She self-publishes stuff. Her name is Orna Ben Shoshan. She actually has a free PDF of the meanings of the Shem Mephorash. 72 cards. She's a surrealist painter, so she draws all these kind of weird paintings. She works she's out of Israel. I'm not sure where. Tel Aviv, of course. And this is a great deck of cards. It's very difficult in the occult traditions to, in Western occultism, to get a good sense of the spiritual meaning of the names of God, because what has become the emphasis is the Solomonic applications of the name, to the point where actually in many cases there is a sense that there's an antipathy towards God, if you will, and this idea that we're taking the name and we're dissecting it and we're using it for power. I'm not going there at all. I think it's foolish to create that level of fragmentation. And I do see the names of God as being holy and windows into holistic, connected awareness that transcends religions, but I see these as very sacred. The 72-fold name of God is first and foremost assigned to the 72 5 degrees of the zodiac. So there are 72 5 degrees segments of the zodiac called quinonces. And the Shem HaMephorash can be used as a mantra to connect, to interface with, to ensoul the entire zodiac circle with meaning and depth. The word Shem HaMephorash is like this. Shem HaMephorash. And you've got a shin and a shin. It begins with a shin and ends with a shin, and has a mem in the middle, which is interesting in itself. And that implies an aleph. The wholeness, so aleph, mem, and shin are in play, implying an aleph. There's so much we can do with this. Shemesh means the sun. Remember the circle and the point, the reconciliation of awareness and eternity? Shemesh, the sun. This, and of course the next path is the sun. So you can see how they are really connecting into one another. I'm just having a sudden little flash of insight of something I had left out, but I want to bring into play, just because it is interesting. If you want to get into this idea of the zodiac, of course we can have symbols for all 12 signs. We can have symbols for all 36 10-degree segments called the decans. And guess what? That's the tarot. The minor arcana, with the exception of the aces, are symbols for the decans. And then we have 72 symbols for the quinonces. We can push this further to 360 symbols. This is a book on the Sabian symbols. The Sabian symbols were divined by a guy named Mark Jones and a scryer, Elsie, I believe was her name. If I'm mistaken, it doesn't say on the back. It really should. It's another one of those cases of sort of a male adept with an indispensable female assistant who doesn't get the credit. But at any rate, what happened was he had prepared these cards with the degrees on them from 1 to 360, and she had and shuffled out of order. He had her scry them in one sitting, and she got an image for each one of them, and then they reassembled it. So there's actually Sabian symbols, and some of them, I will warn you, are like, this is out of the, I don't know, this is the early 20th century. So there's, racist imagery, and this, so this is a cultural unconscious, but it's an interesting experiment in populating the 360 degrees of the zodiac with loci, memory loci. And actually, this is a whole genre of literature, which maybe one for every day of the year, right? You might have like a poem. I'm thinking of Raman Lowell wrote a poem with 365 stanzas, similar to that. Except in this case, it's not 365, it is 360. So the Shin can be really wildly expanded into this circular memory palace, this circular house. And of course, if we're talking about the book of Revelations, the New Jerusalem that descends at the end is essentially a fully populated and harmonized and even urbanized memory palace. So this is Shin expanded into 360 So, as I've said, there are 72 5-degree segments. Now, the Shem Mephorash has 72 3-letter names, which means it has 216 letters in total. 73 times 3 is 216. It's helpful to note that 216 is 6 times 6 times 6. So what it gives us is a cube. So the Shem Mephorash, in addition to being a circle, is also an enormous cube. And it's helpful to think of it as simultaneously cube and circle, cube and sphere. So if you imagine a cube that is completely contained within a sphere, that is also an excellent meditation. And it shines a light on the fact that mind and body, spirit and matter are not two separate categories, but they are like waves and particles, or verbs and nouns, modalities of perceiving, or framings of a state of affairs. So the state of affairs can be cubified or it can be ensphered, or simultaneously, or neither, right? So A, B, A and B, neither A nor B. So that's a fourfold logical set of possibilities to have. So one, the other, both, neither. And sometimes we use that formula to annihilate. So we can call this the via negativa, right? The way of annihilating possibilities until we're left with no propositions at all. We freed ourselves from propositions by embracing paradox. And this is a mystical method, via negativa. So 6 is, of course, the number of the sun. So this is, again, suggesting the strong solar energy happening in this formula, right? Just as I suggest, it's Shemesh. Now, it's interesting because the 31st path, as it turns out, implies the 32nd path, implies the 31st path, implies the 30th path. They imply one another. So the path of the world implies the path of the judgment. And I'm using numbers. I'm saying, 31st and so on. You might be not entirely familiar with why I'm using those numbers. So I will give you a little bit of a look-see here. I hope it's in this book. Basically, in the Kircher tree, there's a numbering system which, as you know, goes 1 to 10 with the Sephiroth, and then 11 through 32. Nice little lamp there. 11 through 32 with the paths. And yeah, here's an example. Now, we are actually going to get into some thinking about how the paths should be numbered, and I don't 100% agree with this version. I mean, bearing in mind that at a certain day, a certain point, it is actually sort of, we can get obsessed with what's the correct code, right? I'm interested in getting it so that it's consistent and so that it has beautiful patterns and so it can make a type of music. Do I think that, there's a right way and a wrong way and we have to get all worked up about it? No, not really, because at the end of the day, you can abandon this method altogether. You can go into some of the stuff that you might find in, say, David Smith or, so honestly, this is like tunings on musical instruments. We could argue about it, but I have particularities. But so my system is which I'll teach you. But I don't want you to think that as I did for a while that this is a sort of life and death matter, because it's not. It's a matter of fine tuning our instruments, and I think the method I've developed it works well. Anyway, so with that as an aside, this so we have the 10 Sephiroth, and you can see up here, this is 11, 12, 13, 14. So it goes back up to the top and starts numbering these. And then by the time it gets down to where we are, last week we were here, 32 and 31. So this is the 31st path. We are now on the 31st path with the path of Shin. These numbers, by the way, are what's called the key scale. So if you read a book like 777 or even certain parts of Skinner's Complete Magician's Tables, you'll use the key scale, basically. Key scale will be down one side of a page of tables, and then there'll be over the top, it'll be, so 1 through 32, and then, gods and goddesses assigned through the spheres and paths, incenses assigned through the spheres and paths, and so on. It's an indexing system. And Crowley actually came out and said, it's just an indexing system. The numbers 11 through 32, don't involve them in your mysticism. Now, I don't always listen to Crowley because, I don't know, right? Sometimes he's lying just because he is. Anyway, so I chose to play with the numbers to 132, and I found some interesting connections, and we'll talk about those in a second. I do want to say one more thing about the Shem Mephorash first. So the Shem Mephorash in the Western tradition, in the Western Hermetic tradition, is different, and it's been used for different things. It's been used for angelology and demonology. So the three-letter names get appended either one of two words, either a ya or an al. So, for example, the first name of the Shem Mephorash is Vaheva, or Yehu. Or, if you want it to be an angel name, it's Vaheva Yod He. So that's Vahavia. Vahavia is the angel that opens the Shem Mephorash. You can think of it as a difference in a way between a triangle and a pentagram, because essentially what happens when you add those extra two letters is you are pentagramizing that name. And so this, as you can imagine, has applications. Once you created an angel, there is also a concomitant projection of shadow. So basically you got the three-letter name from the Shem Mephorash. Then you've got an angel, which has 5 letters, which is derived from the name of the Shem Mephorash. Then you have a one of 72 demonic rulers. So there is a system called, in a series of books called the Lemegeton, the system, and there's 72 demonic rulers called the Goetia. And some people think, there's 72 goetic demons. No, there's each goetic demon, each goetic ruler is assigned, 60 legions, or 6 legions, or 200 legions. It's between 6 and 200 legions. So what's a legion? A legion is thousands. So actually the Goetia is swarms upon swarms upon swarms under 72 ultimate heads. And those 72 heads are then also assigned to the quinances. So you've got an angel, an angelic energy, an angelic choir, a demonic horde. Goetia means howling. And then you have a name of God, which is the resonance that, in a sense, say reconciles the two, or is the unity that is concealed behind that kind of dichotomization. The Shem Mephorash is used to seal the brass vessel. So in metaphorical terms, this could be shadow work, right? You're dealing with these powerful forces, and they are quite powerful, and you would bring the angelic forces would enable the resonance that would allow the raw energy to be corralled into a vessel. And that vessel is typically depicted as a sphere. I think it's toroidal. But it's depicted as a sphere and is coated with the name of the Shem Mephorash, which seals it. There's a whole lot of kind of almost Arabian Nights kind of vibe to these demons. They're like, there are a lot of them are old gods that have been subsumed, but they're also considered like jinn, right? So the idea of a bottle that's sealed, that has a power in it, that gets unsealed, and that power is wild and has to be contended with. I'm not recommending unprotected work with the Govisha. Some people have different takes on it. I consider the Govisha to be, something to it's a type of alchemy of darkness that requires equipment, and that equipment is based in intention and mantras. So I would say, before we even go there, should be able to chant the Shem Mephorash. Obviously, that's something that you'd have to work on your own, because it's a major practice. So another thing to point out is the angels in total have 360 letters, so 72 5-letter names, so 72 pentagrams. So presumably, in order to really deal with the Govisha, knowing the names of God and knowing the names of the angels and having 72 little pentagrams in all of the quinances will enable this circle to be whole, and will give you the kind of resilience you need to handle the kinds of intensity that opening up an encounter with the goetic forces will entail. Interesting enough, this is 360 degrees, so you could spell the names of the angels in a full circle around the zodiac, and I find that to be quite excellent. Consider these things as part of an awakening. Okay. So here's where I'm going to just add a few more little things, and then we'll talk about these cards. I know this one's taking a bit longer, but I think there's a lot in here. So here I've laid out some cards, some paths. This is not all the paths in the tree. I just wanted to show you. This is the 32nd path. This is the 31st path. And of course the 32nd is paired with the 11th, so Aleph and Ta. So this is coming down while we're going up. And then this is the Fool and the World. This is the Magician and the Judgment. This is moving up towards Hod. Okay, so first and foremost, 31. What do we do with 31? 31, remember this symbol? This is a Greek letter sigma, and it represents summa, the sum of all the numbers between 1 and 31. The mystic sum, those triangles, like the tetragrammaton, is summa 4. Summa 4 equals 10. Summa 5 equals 15. Summa 6 equals 21. Summa 10 equals 55. Well, summa 31 equals 496. And 496 is the gematria equivalent of the word Malkuth, the bride, the kingdom. So the 31st path has an intrinsic connection to Malkuth. So this is a fire that is already in Malkuth. This is the awakening of the sleeping serpent. Malkuth is where the energy lies. And when it awakens, when we awaken, then the energy is moving back up towards Kether. And when the circuit is complete, then it becomes a non-linear experience. It becomes an emanation of all the paths, all the letters, all the energies at once, like a chord. But we're playing it one note at a time. 496 is a perfect number. It's the third perfect number. 6 is a perfect number. 28 is a perfect number. What is a perfect number? Okay. Perfect number, you can look this up, is the divisors. So let's take 6, right? 6's divisors are 2 and 3. I believe what a perfect number is that the divisors, when all multiplied together, produce that number. So 6 is divisible by 2 and 3, so 2 times 3 is 6. 28 is divisible by 7 and 4, and 7 times 4 is 28. And the next one up is 496. Don't ask me what those divisors are. I should probably check that out. Why don't we make that homework? Find the divisors of 496 and check that it's a perfect number. Powerful, whole, intrinsic. It is a so the divisors are the prime factors. We want to find what the prime factors here are. Technically, actually, 4 and 7 is not 28. It's 7 and 2 and 2. So same thing. But yeah, so this is 496. So the 31st path, the fire, is already in Malkuth. This is the awakening of what's already there, this is quite powerful. Now, doing the same type of maneuver, we can look at the 24th path, and I know this is a little bit out of left field. Why is he doing the 24th path? The 24th path, what is it? It's the path of death. There we go. It's the path of death. Why do I mention it now? Because it has another one of these connective types of gematria, which is 24. Summa 24 is 300. So, death is rebirth. Spirit, stagnation. Spirit is produced by stagnation. Yeast. So, there is a kind of a yeast worship cult that is connected to what basically Christianity is, a kind of a yeast worship cult. It's made of bread and wine, same active ingredient. What does bread do when you put yeast in it? It rises. What does Jesus do? He rises. But and what happens when the wine, the grape juice ferments, produces spirit. So there is a logic of fermentation. There's a logic of fermentation, and Shin then is the spirit. So it's possible to get drunk off of Shin. Shin is also flammable. So it's a liquid that's flammable. It's liquid fire. So there's you can see these kinds of association chains we can go. Death is rebirth. That's how I'm gonna put it there. So that is another connection you can make. And the last thing I wanted to show you is what's called the Kabbalah of 9 chambers, or Eik Bakar. Remember, Athbash was basically Aleph and Ta, Bet and Shin. That's why we call it Athbash. Eik Bakar is called Eik Bakar because you've got 9 chambers, 22 letters, plus 5 final forms. And this is Aleph, this is Yod, this is Kof. Aleph is 1, Yod is 10, Kof is 100. 1, 10, and 100. Eik, Bet, Kaf, Resh. 2, 20, 200. Bakar, Eik Bakar. All the way through. So the 27 possible forms, because you can see from here on in, after Ta, is Kaf final, and then Mem final, and then Nun final, and Pei final, and Tzadi final. They all have final forms, and that takes it all the way up to 900. So you actually have a complete metrical system. And Aleph written large is 1,000. Bet written large is 2,000. So actually, here's a counting system buried in the alphabet from the beginning. The Kabbalah of 9 chambers, which you can also associate to the Loshu that we discussed. So we can start seeing those 9 chambers, those groups of 3 letters and 3 cards necessarily in those groupings. We can put them into the Loshu, or the Kamiya of Saturn, if you want to play it that way. We're opening up a lot of possibilities of synthesis. The path of the judgment should be an awakening. The kinds of experience you could cultivate or have during this week all relate to taking definite leaps, steps, making moves, lighting lamps. So one thing you could do is light a candle and meditate on a candle, or 3 candles would be an amazing thing to do. Technically, a menorah is like a multi-armed Shin. So it's candles on a candlestick that is like an emblem of flame itself, flame of flames. I don't work with menorah because my background isn't Jewish. I just have obviously a lot of admiration for the wisdom. The kinds of things you can look for are revelatory, magic, dancing like flames of light, spirits from moment to moment to moment. This is a sparkling path. I love these different versions of it. Here's one from the Tarot of the Holy Light, where this exposure of the firmament occurs, and you can see up top, a kind of dove surrounded by eyes. There's all sorts of stuff here. The ladder. There's definitely the preparation of an ascent, even out of the frame of the heavens itself, right? Here's from the ancient Italian deck. This is a classic image, the dead rising from the grave, awakening. Here we have Elise's Blood and Ink. Lisa Ursa's Blood and Ink Tarot. Feel there's something in here that's very it's an extremely abstract. It's to me it looks like the mouth of the trumpet itself is the emphasis here. Leonora Carrington's quite suggestive, of course, of the classic, including the banner. This is the Templar cross, of course. The trumpet, the sound, the name, the calling forth, the opening of the circle, right? Right there in Lisa's card. It's the circle. Here is the Kyrielle. This is the oldest, and here we have. It even looks like I'm not sure what the Latin says, but you have the angels again waking someone out of sepulcher, out of the sleep of ignorance. And that's essentially what it is. We're awakening out of the sleep of ignorance, and that's what the apocalypse always is: awakening from ignorance. The Judgment in the Swiss deck. Nice. I think this deck would be perfect for playing Tarocchi. I've never played Tarocchi, but it seems like it would be fun. Here's a Spirit of the Primal Fire. This is from the Hermetic deck. Again, obviously an incredible labor of magical energy. You see the Shin up there. Powerful little deck. The backs of the cards are also something to pay in mind. People think, there's 78 images in the tarot. There's 79 images in the tarot. But that's neither here nor there. We've looked at a bunch of cards. This has been a slightly longer discussion. I'm going to assign some homework those who you who are in my class, but I'm not going to do it in this video. So if you're signed up for my class and you're also getting the other videos, then we're gonna look at some sigils, because this is an excellent time, because fire is associated with wands, it's associated with will. It's an excellent time to explore creative outpouring. So sigil magic is great. So I would say, if you know what a sigil shoal is, it would be this is a week where we're gonna play with some sigil shoals, and we're gonna make sigils and connect them and create art to emanate our spiritual intentions, and to really facilitate an awakening. So welcome to the Judgment. Welcome to the Great Awakening. Lastly, I'll show you my version. I called it the Aeons. I did this in 2005. This is the first tarot I did. I did it while traveling Europe. And it's just these little sigils. But this was important because this is an image of a bird man awakening. And if you know my work, you know that I'm very keen on this idea of the language of the birds. The bird people that came from the beginning was the birds. So this is the awakening of the bird people. My oral poem, The Castle of Birds, is connected, I think, probably subconsciously to this tradition of bird stories. Aristophanes, the birds, Cloud Cuckoo Land, and all this sort of stuff. I wasn't aware of it when it channeled itself through me, but I'm aware of it now. And so when this came out, you can see the trumpet coming out of his mouth. The square is the capacity to perceive matter, but the loops and the whirls transcend that capacity, so that capacity is shifting and moving. So it's the spiritualization of our scientific awareness, so this awakening, the trumpet that calls the birds to fly in formation. That's a lesson for today. I'll see some of you tonight, and have a look at your cards, give a think, light a candle, and we'll see you later. My name is Dr. Peter Duchemin. This is week 12 of the Forest of Life Venus calendar, and also week 12 of my Meta Magic Tarot course. If you're interested in signing up for this, it happens every 224 days. We have an opportunity, so think about it if you want to take a course. It's a long-term, intensive program of spiritual activation through tarot. So, thank you. This gesture made popular by Leonard Nimoy actually does come from the letter Shin. He famously looked up in synagogue when he wasn't supposed to, and the rabbis were blessing them. So when we say live long and prosper, remember that this is also Shin. This is awaken. So my friends, live long and prosper.